Kia ora, everyone who's joined us. We'll just give it a couple of minutes to allow some more people to come onto the call. Kia ora, everyone who's joined us. We'll just give it another minute before we get started. Got lots of people joining on the call tonight. Hey, I see Tina. Can one of the admins find Tina? Hey!
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Oh,
You all good to
kia
go,
ora,
sis?
Hi, sis. I am good to go. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to kick off and get started. So we've got lots of people still coming onto the call. So we need to go ahead and get started so people will continue to join throughout the kōrero. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for this important zui. It's called Undermined-How the Far-Right Lobby Groups Push Racist Reactionary Agendas and What We Can Do About It. I'm going to do a very short karakia to clear the floor for our discussion. Kia whakarongo ake au ki te tangi a te manune, a te mātui. Tui, tui, tuia. Tuia I runga, tuia I raro, tuia I waho, tuia I roto. Tuia I te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haumi e hui e, taiki e.
Taiki.
Kei te mihi ki ngā tangata whenua o Aotearoa katoa he tiaki ina ahika o konei. I don't want to take a lot of time doing an introduction tonight because we've got three amazing speakers and you didn't come to listen to me. So just a couple of housekeeping matters about the Zoom meeting tonight. We encourage people to use the chat and please feel free to post your questions in the chat because we'll get to those at the end if we can. One of our moderators is going to be posting links into the chat of more resources on this topic. And we encourage you to support the work of our speakers, and we're going to be posting links to their work, to their platforms. And we obviously encourage you to support our work. We're Punaki Anti-Fascist Action. We work in Te Whanganui Atara and come along to our events that we have here. So please note this event is being recorded. So please feel free to turn your camera off if you don't want to be seen and remain muted throughout the event. So thanks very much. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Tina Ngata, and pass over to her. So Tina is Ngāti Porou, mother of two from the east coast of Te Ika Maui. She is obviously very well known, but if you don't know, her work involves advocacy for the environment, Indigenous and human rights. She is author of Kia Mau, Resisting Colonial Fictions. Kia ora, Tina. Thanks for being with us.
Tēnā koe, Valerie. Me ngā mihi kia koe kua whakawātea te ara mō tō tātou hui tēnei poiraru te marumaru te wāhi ngaro tēnā koe. Kia ora, everybody. Ko Tina Ngata tōku ingoa, he mokopuna nā hikurangi maunga na waiapu awa na Ngāti Porou iwi. My mountain is Hikurangi, my awa My river is Waiapu, and I am a Ngāti Porou wahine from the East Cape of the Ika Māori, whose colonised name, of course, is North Island of New Zealand. Really happy to be here tonight. I have been studying the doctrine of discovery and its role in creating systems of power at global, national and local levels since 2013, and am now working on a PhD towards those ends. And probably for the last, I want to say about 3 or 4, no, probably 4 years, have been looking at systems of also white supremacy, in particular in relation to misinformation and disinformation, how they work in relation to democracy, what that means for Indigenous rights as well. And I can see a few colleagues and cohorts, kia ora, Byron, and who have also been working in that space and doing fantastic work. So very interesting times that we're living in, because, as I said just yesterday, the colonialism of the West is really showing its skitty undies at the moment, and we're able to clearly see a lot of what has been hidden through quite sophisticated systems in previous generations. And those systems include, of course, politics, intellectualism, but also media as well. So yeah, very happy to be here. Tēnā koutou, kia ora rā. Am I passing it on?
Kea koe.
Okay, oh, te wā. Okay. Oh, well, I guess one of the things that I would say, just in recognition of what's going on right now, is that, you know, as we all know, that there are some obviously some really concerning rising elements of extreme white supremacy, particularly in the current New Zealand government's agendas, and they've shown some indications of that in their 100-day plan. That's generally just like an appetizer of what's to come. So we can see that they have some very clear, extreme conservative work plans in place for the coming years. And, you know, probably someone would, it's easy to question, well, you know, how did they get here, and what is it that they plan to do? One of the things that I would say is that in terms of how they have come to be voted into power, this is not new. This is something that we've seen happening around the world for quite a few years now. There are multiple countries that have voted far-right governments in with agendas that would have been unelectable probably just a decade ago. And so you can see a real mainstreaming of far-right conservative ideas. And one of the things that I would say is that they've become quite sophisticated in how they push these things to the far right. For us in Aotearoa, I think it's a really interesting kind of case study, even internationally, to watch how centre-right politics can kind of be enshrined. And when I say centre-right, I mean the politics of parties like Labour, who are very good at performative politics, who are very good at the optics of progressiveness, but actually still manage to maintain a power basis around the centre to centre-right space. And so in that way, you know, still right-wing politics have been normalized as being quite central. And anything that's even mildly left gets termed radical. And as you know, Josh mentioned in his recent documentary and blog piece, you know, the media has played a significant role also in mainstreaming these ideas by picking up some of the talking points and presenting them as if they're legitimate, not being transparent about the fact that some of these talking points have been shopped. But I guess the important thing to be mindful of also is that all of this is playing out on a global and national political context that has been shaped by the doctrine of discovery. And so the doctrine of discovery as a European imperial project that spread out across the globe, created, governments that were predisposed to being colonially centered. They were predisposed to centering whiteness. They were predisposed to, to disregarding Indigenous rights, to disregarding Indigenous humanity. They were born out of the soil, particularly the soil of the Crusades, which was, playing out in Palestine at the time, from the 10th century onwards. And so that's kind of the breeding ground of the ideologies of these governments as well. And so naturally, when you have governments that are birthed out of those kinds of ideologies of European and white supremacy, when far-right groups start to seed ideologies and seed narratives, they're going to find purchase in that type of soil. And the governments are not going to be inclined to control that kind of narrative. And in fact, you'll find that a lot of them, they've created systems of democracy that make them dependent actually upon disregarding the rights of non-white peoples, and also disregarding environmental rights. And as Josh pointed out, the general ideological bent upon every single one of these far-right conservative governments around the world has been to delegitimize Indigenous rights and delegitimize the climate movement. And they've all had a pattern about how they've come into power. So in every single case of those elections, where democratic elections have placed them into power, those elections have been characterized by mis and disinformation. And in every single case, they've had a series of policies as soon as they've come into power that look at gutting progressive climate movements, that look at prioritizing, corporatism, that look at attacking anti-racist or, any kind of anti-misogynist policies as well. They generally attack minorities, and you can see that it's almost a carbon copy around the world. And it's not so much that these groups are sharing notes, although you probably could argue that they are sharing notes within groups like WEOG, within regional groups like WEOG. But it's more so that the machinery and the engine room behind these governments, behind what's giving these governments, they are sharing notes. And we know that they're sharing notes because they've been tracked sharing notes around the world. And also we can see, it's in plain sight, that you can see white supremacist groups carrying activities out in the USA. And then a few months later, we will see those exact same events with the same narratives, the same symbology playing out here in Aotearoa. And you can see that happening around the world as well, that there's definitely narrative sharing, symbology sharing. We've tracked that there's resource sharing. So for instance, Steve Bannon is financially supporting Counterspin, the far-right conservative media outlet here in Aotearoa. We know that there were funds from being shared between one of the primary funders of the Freedom Convoy in Canada and the Groundswell truck convoy here in Aotearoa as well. Now, we actually have laws in place to protect transnational terrorism, the funding of transnational terrorism, but they're not, again, as I said before, they're not disposed to picking up that type of information sharing, that type of financial support as well, because they're busy looking at non-white peoples in that space. So when it comes to, as I've said, the national governments, particularly national governments that have been born out of a process of colonization, are not disposed to being able to put policies in place to control that type of activity. But then also, I want to say the transnational foreign space is also not that well disposed to controlling it either, when you consider that places like the United Nations are essentially a collection of colonial governments as well. And a really great way to see that, to be able to highlight that, is to look at the regional groupings within the United Nations and how they vote, particularly how they might block vote as well. And so they work in regional groupings, and the regional groupings around the world are generally geographically defined. So the African nations obviously are all in the African continent. And then you have the Central South American nations, Central and South America. And then you have, so all of these groups are geographically determined. And then, of course, you have this other group called the WEOG group, which is the Western European and Others group. And they block vote and they support each other. And they also hold the majority of the seats on the Security Council at any one time, certainly the majority of the permanent seats on the Security Council as well. And that is not geographically determined. That is Western Europe, UK, USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and Israel. Now, every other regional group is geographically determined. That group is determined by a history of colonialism and being a part of a Western European colonial project. But they also, importantly, have power within that transnational governmental space to be able to block vote, and they certainly hold power within the Security Council as well. And we have seen them utilize their powers in that space to be able to subvert very important moves for justice, and in particular, of course, of recent note, bringing an end to the genocide in Palestine. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to go on about, but that might be enough for now.
Order. Thank you very much, Tina. That is a fantastic way to sort of set the scene. And I'm sure that we will have some more opportunity for some whakawhiti kōrero and questions once Josh and Sina have a kōrero as well. So I'm going to turn over to Josh, and Josh is going to want to introduce Josh. Lots of us have become familiar with Josh Drummond from the recent documentary Trick or Treaty, and that was a really powerful examination of what happened with the voice vote in Australia, but also the potential implications of a similar kind of vote here around an ACT treaties principle kind of bill. So Josh is a Waikato-based writer and researcher who writes about how the news media interface with special interest groups like lobby groups and think tanks. His work on this and other topics has been seen and published on TV3, the spinoff Metro, Stuff, Webworm, Mata, and other media outlets. His newsletter is badnewsletter.ghost.io. Kia ora, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn over to you, and you're going to do a little PowerPoint share for us.
Yep. I've got a presentation to put together. Thank you for the generous introduction. I just want to shout out to Mihi Forbes and Annabelle Lee Mather, who created and produced the Mata documentary. That's their incredible work, and I'm grateful for it, and grateful to be interviewed as part of it. So hopefully, without any tech hiccups, I'll get this presentation happening. You should see a blank screen if it's working. Cool. So we'll get started. As per introduction, I'm a journalist and researcher. My name is Josh. By day, I am a marketer and co-founder of a startup company, which is a little bit of a weird combination. I'm also a dad. In my increasingly spare time, I try to write journalism about journalism for the Bad newsletter and some other outlets as well. I'm going to talk about the networks of neoliberal, ultra-capitalist think tanks active in New Zealand, how they get their narratives out to the public, and the likely role they'll play in the debate. I'm using the term pretty carefully for Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So we'll begin with the obvious one, which I'm very glad to say is becoming more well-known. Atlas have had a real surge in awareness lately, and not really in a good way for Atlas, which I'm very happy about. The British columnist George Monbiot put out a piece about them recently, which was widely shared. I think there's a surge of awareness about the influence that they wield, which is fantastic. There are other big right-wing think tanks and lobbyist networks, but Atlas is the big one. There are over 500 members worldwide. And quote Jeremy Walker, an Australian academic who was also interviewed in Trick or Treaty, his paper, Silencing the Voice, gives a really good summing up of how they operate. Each think tank is designed to generate a constant flow of easily read outputs, duly amplified by aligned media to influence public opinion and shape government policy. flooding the public sphere with constantly repackaged opinion pieces, research papers, submissions to government inquiries, Facebook memes, and shock jock outrage. These agenda-setting policy campaigns present to the citizen as a diverse array of opinion from multiple independent sources, which they're kind of not. I also wanted to shout out the obvious, Atlas Shrugged. The Atlas Network say their name hasn't got anything to do with the libertarian anarcho-capitalist Bible, but I doubt that, because Atlas Shrugged does outline in detail what amounts to their MO, which is basically the rich, who are in their minds a persecuted and disenfranchised minority, gather together and foment societal collapse to fundamentally reshape society among ultra-capitalist lines. So the book isn't all bad. The major plot line has the capitalist leaders going on strike and leaving their businesses, which we probably all wish would actually happen. So of the Atlas Network in New Zealand, the two most active groups are the New Zealand Initiative, formerly known as the Business Roundtable, and the Taxpayers Union. Atlas stopped publishing membership lists in 2022, so there might be other New Zealand members. We don't actually know. But let's talk power. These are some of the most powerful organizations in New Zealand. In 2016, the New Zealand Initiative, I constantly call them the Institute, which isn't right, claimed that through its approximately 70 member organizations, which are large corporations mostly, it represents more than a quarter of the New Zealand economy. New Zealand's Taxpayers Union is one of the biggest in the world. Despite some weird malarkey in their numbers that I'm kind of looking at the moment, it looks like the TPU has more gross members than the British or Australian Taxpayers Union organizations possibly combined. And of course, those organizations are also part of the Atlas Group. There are plenty of other neoliberal right-wing think tanks operating in New Zealand who are not part of Atlas, to current knowledge. Two of the most active are the New Zealand Centre for Political Research and Hobson's Pledge. They're both founded by ex-ACT party members, Muriel Newman and Don Brash, and there are many other right-wing think tanks and lobbying interests in New Zealand. Some are just made up of one usually rich person, some are set up as front groups by other think tanks, but they all seem to tend to share the same tactics and interests as those that are officially linked to Atlas. So while I think it's really important that people know who the Atlas Network are and what they represent, I'd argue that it's about much more than just that one network. The other non-Atlas right-wing think tanks, lobby groups in New Zealand, they all speak the same language, they share the same resources, and they pretty much all have the same aims. Notably, they give each other jobs and are often members of the same families. They're very nepotistic. And when you map these groups out, it's pretty clear that they're pretty much all just the same group, and the ACT Party, and to a lesser extent and a different extent, New Zealand First, work as their political arms. They represent the most powerful, most wealthy interests in New Zealand, and what's really remarkable to me is that with even all the money and power they can bring to bear, their favoured parties remain small and unpopular with the vast majority of the New Zealand electorate. 90% of New Zealand voters don't vote for ACT. Because there's such a disparity of right-wing think tank lobby groups, which is more of a smokescreen than anything that resembles a real diversity of thought, because they're all kind of cult members, it's worth identifying what values or objects they hold in common. And as Tina detailed, they almost always oppose climate change mitigation. There are some exceptions usually around carbon offsets, but that's just a shell game for rich people, in my opinion. They tend to be weird about gender. A lot of the anti-trans scaremongering comes from this network and from these think tanks, and they almost invariably oppose Indigenous rights. So despite their overwhelming unpopularity, these groups are very well resourced, which is to be expected of a group that represents the rich and powerful, and they drive a huge proportion of New Zealand's cultural conversation. They workshop and identify topics that have high conflict potential and to support their goals, and they take these things to social media and legacy media. So in other words, these think tanks have gifted us the culture wars. And as an aside, this is something it's kind of deeply worrying me at the moment. I think it very much worth mentioning that this anti-trans discourse we see so much of that's been fomented by Atlas-linked think tanks, particularly in the UK and the US. This is one of the few things that link a very large number of fringe movements. QAnon, freedom movement, anti-vaxxers, Islamophobia, white supremacy, climate cranks, so many more groups all have transphobia in common. And these groups work very hard to get this discourse seeded in media, and then they do everything they can to amplify it. And once you start looking, these people are everywhere. Just to name a few names, Eric Crampton is New Zealand Initiative's chief economist. He has multiple columns. He's called upon frequently as a political commentator. Jordan Williams and the Taxpayers Union are in the media pretty much constantly. They literally have a 24-hour media hotline. Some poor sap at the Taxpayers Union has to take calls 24 hours a day. Sometimes they're employed in media. Luke Malpass is Stuff's political editor. He leads the press gallery team, and before that, he was a research fellow at the New Zealand Initiative. Muriel Newman was an ACT politician. She now has a gig at News Talk ZB in their premium section. Barbara Chapman is the deputy chair of the New Zealand Initiative, and she's also a director of New Zealand, NZME, who are the publishers of the Herald and producers of News Talk ZB, and that is just a few. One of the main ways these guys work is by doing journalist jobs for them. This is a bit of a blurry screenshot, sorry, but this isn't telling anyone stuff they don't already know, I think. The media establishment completely decimated by market forces. Legacy journalists are overworked, underpaid, they're hopelessly under-resourced, and this is fantastic for the think tanks. They provide resources and quick, snappy quotes at any hour of the day or night. This slide is Google search results from the stuff.co.nz site searching for Ratepayers Report, which was a partnership between Stuff and the Taxpayers Union that started about 10 years ago. Stuff now say that it isn't, and if they have no official partnership with the Taxpayers Union, but when they've used that as a vehicle to get their neoliberal narrative out, often pretty much unopposed. When I asked Stuff about it, they outright refused to answer nearly all of my questions, which didn't thrill me. The latest Stuff story on Ratepayers Report originally included a link straight to a Taxpayers Union form that harvested users' email addresses under the pretense that that was needed to view the report. What actually happened is it signed users up to the TPU mailing list, which is one of the reasons I have some questions about the number of actual TPU supporters. As an aside, as media declines, we can expect to see the think tanks moving into the media space. They're setting themselves up as fair and balanced news outlets in their own right. TPU already does a bit of this with their newsletters and podcasts, and we see similar moves with crank media financed by dilettante neoliberal millionaires like The Platform and Reality Check Radio, all of which star a constellation of far-right think tank-linked voices like Don Brash and Rodney Hyde. So the sort of media hacking works. Media find easy stories where the conflict comes prepackaged. All you need to do is lay down some quotes from some talking heads. They find that irresistible. And as you can see from the screenshots I'm laying out, it means that narratives advanced by the neoliberal lobbyists and their political arms can dominate the news cycle for days. And at this point, I also want to point out that something we don't often hear about is that David Seymour is a creature of the Atlas Network. His only real-world work experience was 10 months as an electrical engineer, and the rest of his life was working for Atlas think tanks and then being the ACT leader. That's pretty much David Seymour. What the Atlas and the Atlas-linked lobbyists and their political mouthpieces are doing are trying with a lot of success to make sure that their false framing of treaty issues are being about fairness and the rule of law dominates political media headlines. They are confident that political journalists' pretense of objectivity, which is in truth a view from nowhere, which prioritizes optics and cheerleading for tactics over fact-based contextual reporting, will mean their message advances unimpeded with the only fact-checking often coming from another talking head. And unless there is a concerted push from audiences, political journalists will just keep doing this because it's pretty much all they can do. It's all they know. Here's an example, I think, of the view from nowhere from a piece on RNZ today. So no one really knows exactly how the campaign against Te Tiriti will go, but I think history and the Australian experience of the Voice referendum gives us some clues. The Voice referendum looked like a shoo-in. The Aboriginal position articulated through the Statement from the Heart enjoyed majority support and widespread public sympathy. At the outset, the Voice, according to some polling, the Voice enjoyed slightly more popularity than Te Tiriti does in New Zealand. Within a matter of months, the neoliberal campaign was able to completely crush it by tilting persuadable public opinion from almost 60% support to 40% in favour of the Voice. Now, this thrilled the think tanks and their political arms. Quoting David Seymour, I think that's very positive for Australia because they've decided they want their constitution to be devoid of racial discrimination, and that's how any country's constitution should be. The Australian No campaign was run with several different organisations putting out several different but aligned messages. So The Guardian says the lobby group Advance, one of the lead organisation, runs one Facebook group highlighting conservative criticism, another highlighting progressive complaints, and a third portraying itself as a neutral news source. So we can expect to see similar in New Zealand. We're already seeing it. Hobson's Pledge and NZCPR are going to target what I'm just going to call the rabid demographic. ACT seems to be trying to occupy the reasonable middle ground, and we may yet see more astroturf players enter the arena as fresh voices who aren't tainted by the existing discourse. They will run a visibility campaign to make it look like there is overwhelming public support for the referendum. Our example campaign there is Three Waters. Remember the Stop Three Waters signs everywhere? I think we're going to see something pretty similar. David Seymour is already, to all intents and purposes, fronting the campaign. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Kathy Costello jump in as well, plus potentially someone young and Māori. And we've already talked about the way that political media will approach that. The Australian, the Taxpayers Union has yet to declare a position on the referendum, but we get a clue to their stance from a visit from Lord Daniel Hannan, who was one of the principal architects of Brexit and director of two Atlas Network think tanks. So in a speech to the TPU audience, which included ACT and New Zealand First members, Hannan had the following to say: so if you are pro-BLM or if you're pro-trans, note that, you just look for who are the designated victims and you don't look any closer. Skipping a bit, this is a new and highly dangerous because it's based on tribal affinity rather than on engagement with the issue. So this is one of the extra bits I wanted to add in here. I think it always helps to be trying to be able to find the big lie. When it comes to this campaign, I think that it's race-based privilege, because if you're Māori, it's really not obvious that you enjoy a lot of privileges unless you count earlier death as a privilege, or being more likely to be poor, or having higher unemployment, or higher infant mortality, or a greater rate of criminal conviction than Pākehā for the same crimes, and many other things. So I think that the apartheid thing, that Māori are a separate race who are demanding as greater treatment, is the really big lie, and I think it's something that's possible to fuse, because I'm not a treaty expert. I'm just a journalist who takes an unhealthy expert in think tanks. But to me, it seems a more honest way to approach this would be that it's not about race, it's about nations. Like, nobody gets mad at the Swedes for having Swedish passports, or building Swedish hospitals, or inviting members of other nations to become Swedish, at which point their descendants both identify as and receive the rights of Swedes by descent. So I think the race-based thing is a lie, a fairly obvious lie if you give it much thought. And the right has to pretend that we're on the slippery slope to apartheid, rather than an uncontroversial and well-established path to a recognition of Indigenous nationhood. Like, it really isn't that. The US has recognition of Indigenous nationhood. That's I think how far behind New Zealand is in that respect. And I think what, this is again me reading between some lines, but I think what is potentially special about Te Tiriti is that it could allow two nations, or even more, to share the same space as partners. I really hate this race-based privilege stuff. I think it's just the most obvious see-through lie. We also get some clues as to how the digital campaign might run from a speech from Sean Topham, whose firm Topham Gurin runs campaigns for neoliberal causes all over the world, but primarily in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Their strategy, to paraphrase Steve Bannon, is to flood the zone with shit. So here's Sean, quote: in the peak point during the campaign, the Australian Voice campaign. No, wait, sorry, that's incorrect. It was a different campaign, but never mind. In the peak point during the campaign, we're posting 30 posts a day and more than 200 or 250 a week. That means you have to generate and publish a new piece of content every 20 minutes. He's saying, how do we unlock these arousal emotions so that people care about our content? So they like it, they'll comment on it, they'll tell their friends, they'll share it with their own audiences, and that's how we build our audience. That's how we convert our supporters, and a bit of emphasis added here, that's how we find people who are on the fence and make up their minds for them. It's as simple as that. So you may have heard the saying, it's been popular on Reddit, that the right can't meme. Oh, sorry, but they can. The right can meme, and they spend millions of dollars doing it. And they're very good at engaging the online leftist community to spread their messages for them. How do they do that? Bad fonts, badly labeled axes, setting themselves up to be mocked. It's all a tactic. It's all a bit. They do this stuff on purpose. Anything that creates engagement is a win for these guys. It's all bait. So I'm not again, I need to lay out some caveats. I'm not an organizer. I'm very far from being a Te Tiriti expert. I am a journalist, and in my day job, I'm a marketer, which is why I've mostly talked about the media and marketing aspects of these campaigns. I want to leave the activism and all the organizing to the experts. But my hunch is that a broad-based coalition is needed against the campaign against Te Tiriti that will need to bring Pākehā on board, which is why I've highlighted these two books. And part of my marketing experience is just to be cautious of debunking. There's no point in arguing online with people who can't be convinced. This will come across as someone a bit weird from someone like me who does debunking, but remember, the strategy is to flood the zone with shit. The inverse square law of bullshit is that if you debunk, you'll get tangled up forever. Your energy gets wasted. Instead, you can diffuse. Diffusing can take the impact out of whole swaths of disinformation. I think one of the best ways to diffuse their disinformation is to name them. So these campaigns come from the Atlas Network, the Taxpayers Union, the New Zealand Initiative, Hobson's Pledge, Topham Gurun, the Ratepayers Alliance, a huge number of other names. The people who work within them are all working for essentially the same organization with the same goals. And I think that if this is pointed out, that these aren't independent voices, this isn't a groundswell of opinion, it takes a lot of their power away for ordinary people, because I think ordinary people prefer not to think that they're being told. So lots of thinks here. No one likes to think they're being told what to think by an entirely real, not at all conspiratorial network of brainwormed billionaires. So I'm highlighting these two books because Bullshit Backlash is by Pākehā author David Slack. It does an excellent job of identifying anti-treaty narratives and diffusing them, and instead shows how a Te Tiriti-based path is based in fairness and historical truth. And I know this because when I was a confused Pākehā law student, this was the book that convinced me. Anat Shankar-Onsorio's book talks about the importance of not engaging on an opponent's ground. Instead, it's important to create a narrative which crucially has to be true, to engage your base, persuade persuadables, and upset opponents into spreading your message. In New Zealand, Jess Berenson-Shaw's organisation, The Workshop, is doing a lot of good mahi in this space for a New Zealand context. For the media, I wish I knew more about what could be done in the media space. But one thing that I would advocate really strongly for, that I think the media should implement yesterday, is something like the BBC's code of which calls for the accurate identification of political lobbyists. This is the code. It's really clear cut. It applies to left as well as right. And if the media don't implement this ASAP to prepare for this discussion, I really think we should be asking why not. Will there be a referendum? I think there will. I'm not a fortune teller, but I think that either Luxembourg cave and permit a government referendum after being convinced of the need for it by this astroturf campaigning, or if he's convinced out of it by Chris Finlayson style Nats to rule it out, I think the think tanks will organise a citizens-initiated referendum. I really don't think it'll be hard for them to get 350 to 400,000 signatures. But I think that some of the confusion and lack of movement on the part of the think tanks at this point in time is because there isn't a clear path forward on whether we get a government referendum or a CIR. But we already see some of the loudest reactionaries pushing hard for a CIR, and that's ultimately where I think it will go. My take, this is New Zealand's Brexit. This is New Zealand's voice referendum. I think the advantage we have is knowing who's behind it, because it's the same people who were antagonising for Brexit, the same people who were antagonising against the voice, and we know the tactics that they will use. So again, you're leaving the organising to the organisers. I think what's needed is to combat this astroturf with real grassroots action. I think what's needed is kotahitanga. And instead of engaging with our opponents' narratives and stories, we need to tell the truth. We need to tell the real story. And what these people really hate and really fear, you can actually hear David Seymour say these actual words. He talks about the problem with Māori being the way they act as a collective. What they hate and fear is collective action. They're frightened by the idea of a people's movement that is rooted in real truth. and a spirit of reconciliation. Thank you.
Kia ora, Josh. So much in there. Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure that there will be lots and lots of questions coming out from that kōrero, and lots of really great guidance there around what's coming down the pipe, which is quite frightening stuff. There's been a few questions about your writing. Once again, we're posting links in the chat, and we'll save the chat and let people know what those links are so that you can subscribe to Josh's newsletter, help support his work. So we're going to turn now to Sina so we can talk a little bit more about the fight back to the stuff, because once again, we're armed with the information, but what do we do with that information once we have it? So I just want to introduce Sina Brown-Davis. Sina is well known to lots of us in the activist community as an anti-colonial and anti-capitalist activist who's been struggling against reactionary right bullshit for about 35 years. She is intent on inspiring and facilitating people to take action and be involved in the global struggle for decolonization and justice. She works as part of anti-fascist Otipoti, the Climate Action Network, and Paratini, Mātaki Mō Paratini, so the recently formed group for which she's got the banner behind her. Over to you, Sina. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, ko Sina Brown-Davis aho. On my father's side, I get my good looks and whakapapa from the Te Uri o Hau and Te Roro peoples. On my mother's side, I whakapapa to Whaleula in Samoa and to Ngāwhau in Tonga. I've been want to talk about struggle and about social movements and about my position. But first, I want to start with an observation that people now believe that they're individuals. They think of themselves as individuals, and this turns into a form of political practice that is deeply neoliberal, which often couches itself in terms of liberation or transformation politics, but are couched in an individualized therapeutic approach, which works well for activists and people and NGOs, but takes away that we all belong to a collective. Yeah. I am from a legacy of struggle. I am a descendant of tō rangatira that fought. Fascism for me isn't something new. This landed on our shores over 250 years ago. Colonialism is fascism. And the West now is experiencing a rise in fascism. And as Tina mentioned before, it's just simply showing its true face, revealing to the world what it has always been for us, the colonized. It has always represented death, destruction, dispossession, and colonial domination. And I'm so proud to come from a legacy of tō rangatira that fought that from the outset so that I would remain and so I would know who I am and where I come from. And I think that was really important to draw on. And I make a distinction between activism and community organising. Activism is the policy or action of vigorous campaigning to bring about change, normally through government, etc., etc. I'm more of a community organiser. For me, I really believe in empowering people to empower themselves so we can tip the balance of power over. And this is the legacy of social movements that we all came from. When I was a young girl, my great aunt took me up to the occupation at Takaparawhau. So there was that. It's an explosion in the Māori world of the occupation at Takaparawhau, the land rights movement, the anti-apartheid struggle. I started going to Hikoi ki Waitangi in 1984. So what I see that's missing now is those times people were politically conscious. Yeah, we had a lot of political understanding. The decolonisation movements in the Pacific were really strong. We had a lot of interaction and a lot of meetings. We had things like Hui Oranga that brought activists together so we could talk about our particular struggles. So we all come from a legacy. And then moving on to that, I was very active in the struggle against HIV/AIDS and like community-based responses and coming together as whānau and people providing care and support when the government wasn't up to it or didn't provide it, and very much inspired by groups like ACT UP from the States. Yeah, I want to pay my respects like to people like Sid Jackson and Papa Moana Jackson Te Ngata Matua, who put Te Tiriti o Waitangi back on the political agenda when it didn't exist, and how precious that has been. And every single gain that we have as Māori, the price of our rights have been paid in blood. Yeah, the price of our rights have been paid in struggle. And one thing I can thank that short little prick, David Seymour, for is that inadvertently he has united Māori, and I haven't seen Māori united in this way for a long time. What's missing in my mind is that the people that are most disenfranchised in this country are our urban Māori, are our incarcerated people, are our gang whānau, that we don't leave anybody behind. So I want people to believe, and there's a thing that Gary Foley says all the time, and it's the only Chairman Mao quote that I will ever say, is that educate yourself and educate your people. If you can't talk about these issues to your whānau, don't think that you can go out and tell people in the community what to do, yeah? Change begins with your whānau. Educate yourself, then go and educate the people. Know about the legacies that we hold and that we carry forward. Think about your relationships. Good activism is relational for me. Building relationships and trust takes time, yeah? Building political consciousness takes time. Being consistent over a long period of time and having integrity is really important. That's really being appreciative of the mana of those who have come before us and the giants whose shoulders that we stand on, and to be very mindful about how precious that is. One group that Josh didn't mention, I think Valerie and I were inadvertently helped create, was the Free Speech Union. And our wonderful organising that we did in Auckland to deplatform Lauren Southern and Stephen Molyneux, that was a beautiful exercise in solidarity. We came behind the Muslim community who rang the alarm bells. Look, there's these fascists spruiking the Great Replacement Theory. They want to come to New Zealand. So we just got hold of them, we organised them, we stopped them. And this wasn't the white left. And I will say that the white left can just be as toxically racist as the right. Sorry, but it's true. I really believe that those who feel it know it. And the wonderful thing about that exercise is that we had Muslim people, tangata whenua, Asians Against Tiro Rangatiratanga, a whole coalition of people that came together to deplatform these people. And it was wonderful and it is doable. So I think it's really important to walk your talk in your community, yeah? Be valued to your community, to be humble, yeah? About the work that we do, to uplift each other. It's hard work, yeah? You've been around for a long time. This ain't easy work, but we're doing the good work to make sure that the generations to come, we are thinking and mindful of the 7 generations ahead of us and what we have to do. I'm a bit usually more confident in front of a crowd on a megaphone, so pardon my nervousness talking like this. Usually can't shut me up. So yeah, so what we don't do is that we don't strategize enough. And you look at the right, they're talking to each other and they're strategizing all the time. And then we become reactive to their agenda. We buy into their framing, which is a lot of time and energy wasted. We're not talking about what our vision is. You know, that's one thing I really miss about our Papa Moana. He had a clear vision of where we could take this country and what constitutional transformation could provide for us all going forward into the future. We're not talking about that enough, yeah? We're not talking about what value we can add to people's lives, how we can make people's lives easier, and we have to. That's exactly right. Our own narratives, our own stories. Let me think. I'm really lucky to have like-minded people. I couldn't have sustained this work over this long period of time with trusted people, dear people that I love. I want to make a comment that my father was a formerly incarcerated man. He said that activists need to be more organised than organised crime, and he's right. Yeah, he's so right. We have to build those trusted relationships, yeah, and be completely focused about what we have to do. And I think this moment in time is really special, and our hearts and minds are in Gaza. The world is having an anti-colonial movement. We're watching in real time people being genocided, and that resonates with all of us colonized people, because what they're doing to the Palestinians, that was done to us here. Yeah, that was done all over the world. So our hearts and our minds are with Gaza. And there's a strength and a resistance and a resolve and a steadfastness that even under all of those conditions, Palestinians still keep fighting, still keep struggling. So we bear that in mind and keep that in our hearts, that we will never stop. Yeah, we can never stop. We have our whenua at stake. The future is at stake. We need to care for Papa Tuanuku. We need to care for each other. I'm expecting my first mokopuna in 20 days. Yeah. And I'm fired up and excited, but that adds a certain edge to me, and people think that I've gone hard now. I have his future to fight for. We all have a future to fight for. I wanted to pay our respects to our takatapui and our gender diverse and our trans whānau. Too often we've seen that the gateway and entryway into extreme right politics is transphobia. And it's been exciting and electrifying to see the self-organisation and the self-pride and not stepping back and standing up. And the thousands of people that got up in support of trans rights was wonderful. Yeah. We've got to get busy. We had good results in Te Waipounamu when we bounced those counter-spin people from venue to venue to venue. It doesn't take much. You just need to get a small crew and keep the fire at their feet, yeah? Not buying into their narratives, but they can't handle the pressure. And I think that was particularly important to me with people like Carleen Hiriora, who was trying desperately to push QAnon bullshit and far-right bullshit into Māori communities. But we got onto her fast, we got organised, we got information out to our people and helped to nip that in the bud. Just for everybody to remain strong and connected, that the change will come from the flax roots, and it's the whenua that sustains us, it's the whenua that keeps us strong. This resurgence that we're seeing of anti-colonial struggle in the world because of solidarity with our Palestinian brothers. We just saw an invasion day, hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, and our Aboriginal brothers and sisters sharing the platform with our Palestinian brothers and sisters, because our struggle is one. We need each other. We need each other. We need to rely on each other. We need to trust each other to fight going forward. And like, we can't fight on empty, yeah? I think sometimes my big criticisms with a lot of activism and organising is that people go hard, people go handy, people get burnt out and people get disposed of, and we can't treat people like that. That's not the world that we want to live in. We have to care for each other, we have to nurture each other. If we have people that are going to get knocked down, we have to like bring them back up and keep people strong and make people feel. We have to build community. We're fighting back against 30, 40 years of neoliberalism, where the individual is all that matters in society. And it's like Carl, I'm not an individual. I'm part of a hapu, I'm part of a rainga. I am a descendant of thousands. We need to rebuild those connections between each other and those connections within our community. We have to educate ourselves, do things smartly. One thing that I love that we did together, Valerie, was the weapons blockade. And before we successfully shut that down, we had deep learning at a conference. So I really love that MO of doing things, have a deep learning, a deep political understanding of what you're doing, and then move into action. The day after that blockade, we had a wonderful event. Ms. Tina was there, it was called Karanga Tangaroa. And it was beautiful. It was using our culture and our strength as wahine Māori and our karanga as a powerful political force to reach out and call across the oceans against militarism and against what we can see happening to us. We're getting it at all fronts now. In the climate, you see the Americans gearing up in the Pacific, it's on. But our tupuna weren't stupid. I think they knew when they signed Te Tiriti that times like this would come. So we need to uphold and uplift Te Tiriti. I'm not one to really care about the principles, because the main thing Te Tiriti left for us is our right to self-determination and our tino rangatiratanga and our mana motuhake, and we can all work behind that. If you want to do something and you're good in your local community, contact your local marae. Go and put your hand up when they've got hui. Go help in the kitchen. Build those trusted relationships over time and they will bear fruit. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Sina. Thank you very much. There's lots in your kōrero and lots of, I guess, questions and points that I want to explore with both you and Josh. And there's quite a few questions coming through on the chat. So Josh, I just want to ask you about a couple of points that you made. You talked about that Steve Bannon quote about flooding the channels with shit, right? This overwhelming kind of morass of memes and all the rest of it. So I guess the question is, does that work for us as a strategy? And I guess the other kind of related point is about conflict. And you're talking about these think tanks presenting this kind of ready-made conflict for the media. And again, is that a strategy that works for us? And if not, why not? Why is it so successful for them?
So it's tricky to counter this stuff, and that's by design. Like the Terry Pratchett quote I always like, which is, of course, he was paraphrasing somebody else, which is the lie can run around the world before the truth has its boots on. So if you're going to counter this stuff with the truth, it's going to be hard. It's hard work. So what you need is a lot of people who are willing to do the hard work and commit. So what that looks like as organization, again, not my specialty. I know what it looks like online, and I know what it doesn't look like. I think to paraphrase the old anti-smoking campaign, that every tweet is doing you damage. I don't think Twitter is a good space to be in. It's owned by a megalomaniac billionaire who's using it exclusively as a platform to boost far-right views. I don't think it's a good space to be fighting in. That's my opinion. Other people may get great mileage and already have great networks of people on Twitter. If that's the case, then if it works for you, to stay in it. But memes work. Memes are fun. Memes are a good way to highlight hypocrisy. The cartoonist Dylan Horrocks says that memes are basically the new political cartoons, and there's no reason why you can't have young activists making memes and spreading them. Likewise, this sort of work and the long form stuff that I do, like I think I'm pretty sure I'm too old for TikTok, but there are plenty of people out there who aren't. And if they want to take the work that's done by old people like me and put it out on the new social medias, making it shorter, making it more digestible, then I think that's really important work. I think something else that's important is the diffusing stuff. If you can take, Facebook has to do some level of transparency in their ads. TikTok has similar. Paid campaigns are meant to have promoters attached to them. So valuable work that can be done is highlighting when a campaign comes from one of these special interest lobby groups. Pointing out that a campaign is from the TPU, which is part of the Atlas Network, which is a bunch of asshole rich people who want to control how you think. Again, sounds like a conspiracy, but it's not. That is an important truth to tell. And I don't think it's a coincidence that so many conspiracy theories act as a weird kind of doppelganger mirror of that truth. There really are vast networks of very wealthy people who the only thing they want in the world is to become wealthier and do more colonizing. So yeah, I think the main thing in the pushback is to keep truth at the center of it, to keep historical truth at the center of it, and call out like the fact that the narrative that David Seymour is advancing around the treaty is, I don't think it's too far to call it a lie. Like, it's historically inaccurate, it's legally incoherent, and that's the kind of defusing that I think needs to happen here.
Kia ora, thanks, Josh. Sina, you talked a little bit about there's a couple of really good questions that people have asked, and one is, who's providing a vision of a future kind of worth fighting for? And I guess I wonder if you, Sina, but also you, Josh, want to talk a little bit about who is providing us a positive vision, but also to what extent is the kind of the end of the Labour government and the kind of failure of any of that kind of transformation actually given more fuel to the kind of underlying neoliberal kind of individualistic approach. It's basically like, fuck y'all, I got mine, kind of, you know, double cab ute driving macho man kind of perspective that's kind of come to the fore with this recent election. So I guess that's kind of two parts of the question. Like, has so much hope been taken away because of the failure of the Labour government? And is there somebody putting forward a better vision that is hopeful for us? Where do you see that coming from?
I just wanted to actually start off by thanking Tina Ngata. She is a very rare public Māori intellectual that has shared her learning and her knowledge selflessly with everybody for years, and how important and how precious that is. Our tūpuna had great vision, Papa Moana had great vision, mana whenua have great vision for how we can live in harmony with each other and our whenua. All the answers come from here, yeah? All the answers come from our whenua and from the people that have been entrusted to care and look after each other. It's all here. Indigenous worldviews, what will save the planet? But people are too racist to realise that, and I've been frustrated for years globally. If you look at the climate movement, it is Indigenous peoples that hold the gift of living sustainably and in harmony with each other in the future. That's the vision. It's not complicated, yeah? Manaakitanga, we've got beautiful values that come from this whenua. Aroha, manaakitanga, tautoko, there's a living, breathing values that come to life when we treat each other and we treat our whenua well. That's the vision. Mana motu hake, that's a beautiful vision, yeah. We have to make those visions reality.
Kia ora, Sina.
And I get annoyed with these racists scared of Māori. Māori will more likely feed you to death than do anything badly to you. So it just shows how little these people know about us and our culture. So I don't know what they're afraid of. Our Pacific ways are beautiful ways, and they're sustaining ways. They sustain people spiritually, physically, and mentally. It's a beautiful way of life. But white supremacy is so entrenched in people's hearts and minds that they can't see that karoha for them.
Josh, do you want to have a kōrero around that? You're on mute.
Here I am talking about how good my corporate Zoom skills are, and I managed to talk on mute. That's cool. I just wanted to back up what Sina said. One of the most inspiring speeches I ever saw anyone give in my life was Mana Jackson, who gave a speech to a room full of pretty skeptical journalists at a press club in Hamilton, and articulated, like, just summed up so much in a really astonishingly articulate and well-meant passage. I don't know. It was really affecting. I think his vision was remarkable. I just wish I knew more about it. Tina Ngata, again, shouting out the work she just did on the spin-off with the she had an article that someone else posted in the chat and may hopefully post again, which was about the 5 things that Māori communities are doing around climate change that's guaranteed not to depress you. Like there's amazing work being done on this. There's fiction as well. I think stories are a good place to explore this. I think overseas, George Monbiot has some pretty remarkable ideas around better stories and better ways of living. But just shout out to what Sina said. I think we have this stuff already. I think we have the stories already. We just need to do a good job of highlighting them.
Kia ora, thanks very much. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I think that piece about 5 things about Māori communities is Nadine and Huda, who may be on the call with us this evening. And I just yeah, kia ora, and a shout out to Nadine. And I just want to highlight Tina's piece that she wrote very recently as Te Tiriti as a protective shield against global terror. And one of the things that she points out is that the far right parties coming to the fore all have the same kind of outcomes. So the demolition of public services, the privatization of public assets, centralization of political power, removing constraints on corporations, destroying protections for marginalized groups, removing protections for the environment, supporting landlords against tenants, criminalizing protest, and educational reforms that suppress education on the harms of racism or colonialism. So, and Tina goes on to say, if that looks familiar, that's because it's a neat checklist of this government's intentions as well. What we're seeing are attacks on all sides. So the really kind of frontward face of that stuff are attacks on Te Tiriti, attacks on Māori, but we're seeing attacks on environmental protections across the board, attacks on our water, attempts to privatize the health service and educational services, and obviously supporting landlords against tenants. And because the government, of course, is made up of plenty of ex-cops, we can just hold our breath while they come up with some ways to criminalize protest even further. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that's coming down the pipe that isn't necessarily immediately obvious. And I think we need to be really, really clear about what it is that's happened. Sina, you talked a bit about the kind of neoliberalism of activism and the need to engage more clearly in collective struggle. It seems to me that climate change is going to require us to imagine different social forms from how we currently operate with our kind of quite isolated individual lives. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit more about what that collective struggle looks like in terms of activism, how we can do that better in the days to come.
Start off small, start off with your whānau, start off with your community. I saw Tawhana made a great point about kawa and tikanga. People to be, you have to be, what's this word in my mind? I can't think of it. Have integrity with how you treat people. Yeah, walk your talk. Yeah. And then you can build with that. What we found really surprising in Ōtepoti when we bounced counterspin, that there was widespread support. There were little old ladies ringing into venues for us. So people need to be comfortable to find a role and a place for everybody in our struggle so that nobody is left behind. And there's a power, I think, that COVID and the pandemic really isolated us and we forgot about meeting and coming together. I like to see that the tikanga of protest has changed when we care for people, that we feed them and look after them really well. Those are values that you can live in your daily lives and with our protest and our social movements as well. But there's nothing more powerful than standing together. But we got to get busy. Shane Jones wants to rip up Papatūānuku, resume deep sea oil drilling, mine in our in the conservation estates. So all of our social movements need bolstering. Find something that inspires you in your heart. If there's nothing in your community, start something up. You'd be surprised about what's out there. We need to use culture and art and music to inspire and uplift people. Yeah, those are things that can build collectivity and collective action. It's easy for me, being Polynesian, to think collectively, but it's not beyond Pākehā people as well. 30, 40 years of neoliberalism has tried to knock that out of people. But I grew up with Pākehās, and we have nice things like Bring Our Plate and other sort of collective acts. We've had our unions smashed and other things smashed, but we can rebuild those. Yeah. Come together, look out for each other, find out about what you want to do, what inspires you, and just get busy. It's not complicated.
Kia ora, we've got an interesting question, and I guess, Sina, I wonder if you want to just address it and maybe, I guess, direct them to some groups and resources. I'm a first-generation immigrant, and a lot of my volunteering is with people who are either themselves first-generation immigrants or whakapapa to another country in their countries, and in some instances, because of the need to adapt to what works in the society they're coming into, or the need to survive, they adopt right-wing colonialist thinking without realizing that this is the source of their ideas. And they say, for instance, Malaysian immigrants who associate their constitutional provisions with what is happening here in New Zealand, or the recent celebrations among the Hindu diaspora for a new temple built over a mosque in India. What's a good strategy to dislodge from POC minds right-wing talking points that stem from colonialism? Is there anything that has worked particularly well rhetorically? So, Sina, I wonder if you want to...
We have a wonderful group called Asians for Tino Rangatiratanga. They're a grassroots group. You can look them up. I'm mindful that a lot of our migrant whānau can't become politically active until their immigration status is confirmed, and Pākehā and other people forget that. Look up the work of Professor Mohan Dutta, and he's done extensive work about Ndutva and the struggle against it here and globally. Yeah, so those are like two people and two groups that are really important. I really want to court our people of colour that migrate here and turn to your own history. If you're being a colonised person, think about how your peoples gained their independence and the struggle that took in and how that happened and what resonated with you, and then make the linkages with the colonial process here. It's not a big bridge to get to fill.
Kia ora, Sina. Thank you very much for that. I think, you know, some of the great learning that came out, I guess, in 2018 after the Southern and Molyneux trip was a lot of examination of kind of the operation of white supremacy, that kind of stuff, and how that impacts on various communities across, how that is operationalized across various communities in Aotearoa. We really need to think about that stuff, because one of the astroturf groups that was exposed, that did actually come to the forefront, was an attempt by Hobson's Pledge in the lead up to the election to kind of appeal to immigrant groups on kind of ideas that somehow Māori had preferential status in Aotearoa, that somehow we needed this kind of one law for all, which is the typical Hobson's Pledge bullshit that they're jamming down the throat. And the great thing is that it was exposed a little bit. But one of the things that was really troubling is that some of the comments from some of those communities is that those communities were being largely ignored. And the concerns of those communities were largely being ignored by lots of political voices and people with power. So, you know, into a vacuum, some of that stuff goes. And I guess that's a question I have for Josh, is that the ACT Party, I see the ACT Party puts out, 10 media releases a day. We've got the Taxpayer Union putting out 10 media releases a day. Literally, I watch them on Scoop. Ba, 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 ba. Is it helpful for the political left to be doing the same, to be making comment all the time about things, to be making noise in the hope that some bit of that gets picked up?
I wish I knew. I wish I could just say yes or no. I think it might be. I think I think that it's important that they're hacking the media and their desire for news. They're doing a media's job for them. Like I talked about it at length, so hopefully I don't have to. I probably shouldn't repeat myself, but I think it would be helpful for left organizations to step up their what they put out and how often they do it. But that requires a lot of resourcing. Like the Taxpayers Union makes a lot of money. They have a big war chest. So do the other organizations I talked about. So this is where like the question of how do you unite around a single comms strategy or get a bunch of groups sending out press releases. Media training is a pretty important thing to have as well, because these guys will parcel up what they send out is basically news ready. It's good to go. The journalists know that they've if they've sent it out, there's a prepackaged story all good to go. So it's a bit of a vexed question. I wish I had a definitive answer for it, but I think the short version is, yeah, it would be good to step it up. Might also be interesting these people think they're being edgy, which is really interesting to me, because they're repeating really old, really dull, really conservative narratives that are not edgy at all. Like edgy these days is maybe is like communist stuff, like maybe overthrow the means of maybe the people should seize the means of production, yeah, that kind of stuff. You never hear that on these outlets that think of themselves as edgy, like talkback radio. So I don't know, maybe lefties could call them up and give them a little bit more of a ride. But ultimately, I don't know if that helps shift the conversation towards the persuadable people in the center. I think they're the ones who need to know, for instance, that like when the government is called white supremacist in its actions, it's accurate because they're still leaning on the doctrine of discovery, not because they're Nazis. So there's a lot of nuance and a lot of tricky comms stuff that needs to be done to people in the middle who I think are fair-minded, but don't have. If you ask them what the doctrine of discovery was, they probably couldn't tell you. They don't necessarily know about the way that the treaty was just junked by the likes of Justice Prendergast when he called it a simple nullity, when he said that it was signed because it was signed by savages who couldn't understand what a treaty was, that it didn't count. Like, I think if more people knew that, more of the fair-minded people who just currently aren't educated on it, they would be outraged, and they should be, because it's outrageous.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you. I guess what I would say is, it seems to me that certainly that there's a kind of churn and burn through a lot of mainstream media outlets. So you get a lot of young, poorly paid journalists who are looking for those prepackaged stories. So to some extent, and it may be not much, but some of that stuff can having a much more regular voice out there can foreground us as people who have something to say on issues that come, when they come up, and if they're aware of us trying to make some of those media relations. But of course, that does take huge amounts of energy and resources to do that kind of work. So yeah, like, many hands make light work, and getting our voices out there a lot more. I've certainly, in respect of the issue of Palestine, for example, I've certainly appreciated the Māori Party putting out really clear points of action that they'd like to see the New Zealand government taking. It's just in saying some of the things that they're saying, they are widening out the conversation. And, I think we need to keep saying those things and pushing those conversations out there, because lots of people are able to listen and are able to hear those things. But it is a huge challenge when you're up against quite well-resourced opposition. And lots of the ways that the ACT Party and the Taxpayers Union have of conceptualizing their campaigns is very clever. It's absolutely clever stuff. The treaty principles bill, the 3 points that are going on the referendum, like they're really common sense kinds of ideas that people go, oh yes, of course, democracy is one person, one vote. And I think it's really terrifying because they're masters at this kind of stuff. They really are very, very good at it. And I think on the political left, we say, oh, it's complicated. And of course it is complicated, but then we don't bother to break it down for people in a way that's understandable for people to walk them through those steps. And on the political right, they're hoping people don't walk through those steps. But on the political left, I think we need to get a hell of a lot better at walking people through those steps, as you say, around what does the doctrine of discovery mean for about white supremacy and about this referendum, for example, and about a whole lot of issues about, you know, water and the privatization of water that's going on. All of this kind of stuff. We need to get better at breaking down those messages and communicating that complexity in a way that takes people along with us. But Sina, do you have any corridor that you want to add in there?
I think what I'm sort of noticing is that we have a lack of strategy and a lack of coordination. The most brilliant comms I see are rangatahi Māori on TikTok and on Instagram. So it's out there. I think it just needs to be coordinated. We need to hui more. We need to talk more. What I'm seeing is a lack of satire. I love laughing at these pricks. We haven't had good political satire in this country for a long time, and that can deflate a lot of hate and a lot of things is just by taking the piss and laughing at them. Yeah, not jumping and reacting to their framing, refusing their framing, and taking back our narratives and telling our own kōrero. Yes, laughter is powerful and it's good for the heart and it's good for the soul. And it's good food to keep people struggling. But yeah, definitely a lack of coordination, a lack of strategy, and a lack of content. I miss indie media. I remember when that was really strong and you could like publish your stories, publish your events, your whatever you were doing. You had a global audience straight away. Yeah, I miss those days. So yeah.
I was thinking about doing a satire Saturday thing for my blog just for fun. I mean, I used to write a lot of satire for mainstream. Hell, I could call up the Waikato Times and ask them if they want their column back. They probably won't, but it might be funny.
Do people remember those big puppets? What were they? Spitting image? They were fantastic. Somebody make a puppet of that little short guy and act, be hilarious.
You know, it's interesting, Josh, that comment about that you said about the right actually wanting people to effectively to mock them and make fun of them. Like, how does that, I guess, meet with an idea around satire?
So I've been really conflicted about satire because I used to write a lot of it, and I kind of like I guess I lost my faith in the ability of laughter to change anything when I saw how the right weaponized irony. Byron Clark, and shout out to him, he had a really good comment a little while ago that's probably actually worth reading out. So just on the media commentating part, Byron says, I used to get called on to comment a lot by media. They're happy to get a left-wing person if they're an expert, but a lot of background work goes in expertise, and I've turned down a lot of requests since my book came out because I haven't kept up to date on the issues. But yeah, that's very true. Like, if you become a go-to person for the media, they'll keep coming to you for comment. And this is one of those areas where it's not about left and right. It's about who'll pick up the phone and who is media trained enough to offer a soundbite. That's helpful. On the satire front, I think what Sina said about not engaging with their narrative, like David Seymour puts himself up as a figure of fun a lot because it's a way of crafting his image. He wants to be the harmless geek. Yeah, no one can possibly be threatened by this guy when he's trying to entrench the most anti-Māori legislation this side of the 1800s. So yeah, it's maybe a tricky line to walk, but I think there's absolutely a place for laughing at these people in the right way when you're not when you're not engaging with them as in the way that they're wanting to be engaged with.
Thanks, Josh. Sina, do you have any closing thoughts, Ehor, that you want to share before we have a karakia?
Struggle is a creative process, but from destruction, creation and creativity is born. We can imagine and create our world anew. I'd like to end with a quote, and please everybody read this book, Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. And he reminds us for us to settle your quarrels, come together, understand the reality of our situation, understand that fascism is already here, that people are already dying who could be saved, that generations more will have poor butchered half-lives if you fail to act. Free Palestine. Yeah, I think in our hearts, let's free Palestine, because Palestine can liberate us all and keep us strong and connected to struggle, and that our wish is for Palestinians to be free, but it's our wish for all of us to be free. This is a tiring, grinding, heartless, cold society to live in, and I'm a human being, I'm not a robot. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Sina. Josh, anything that you want to close with?
No, I think a lot of good's been said. There's also had a lot of really insightful, helpful comments, which I'm pleased to see. Nothing in particular from me. Just thanks for inviting me on, and yeah, watch this space, because there's going to be a lot more to come from these guys. They really are just they're opening up their war chests, and they're just getting started.
Kia ora, Josh. I think on that cautionary note, I really want to thank Sina, Josh, and Tina, who has had to leave because of a family emergency, for your time. And I guess, as Sina said, I want to remind everybody that this is one space here for learning, but please carry on with your learning, with your involvement, with your education, and to echo that call for strategy. Like, if we have a plan, we are far more likely to achieve our plan than if we have no plan at all. So even if your plan is not that well formed, or that detailed, or that precise, kaita pai, make a plan and figure out what you can do as a collective, and working with others in your community, in your ropu, whatever works, to fight back, because that's what's on the agenda for this year. Here in Te Whanganui Atara and in Pōneke, we got lots of plans for the fight back, but we are really interested in connecting with people around Aotearoa for the fight back, but also for building the future that we want to have, for a treaty, a Te Tiriti just future, for a climate just future, for dignity for all people who inhabit these lands. So yeah, kia ora, and massive mihi to you both for your time, for your efforts, for your work that you're doing, which is so beneficial for all of us. So thank you for being with us tonight. I just have a little karakia to close for us. And just again, to thank all of you all for spending your time with us tonight, to learn and to take some of this kōrero on board. We will be posting the recording of this on our Facebook page. So check out Pōneke Anti-Fascist Action for that in the next day or so. So thanks again to everybody. He karakia tātou. Kia horo, te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, he huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou i a tātou katoa. Hoi anō, po Māori e whānau, ka kite.